All right, so let's jump into Apex and email, and specifically what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how we can execute Apex upon receiving an email, and how also we can send an email programmatically from Apex. So inbound email services. So the mechanism by which we can receive emails and then process Apex code, so process those emails in Apex, is via an email service. When we're running our email services, the number of executions, or the number of emails that we can receive per day, is 1,000 multiplied by the number of user licenses. Another thing to keep in mind associated with these, so there's that limit associated with user licenses. There's also an issue with the fact that one of the things that we'll be doing later on is generating email addresses that would be the target email address that we'd be sending these emails to. There's not portability between orgs, and so what that means is that any unique email address generated within, for instance, a sandbox cannot be replicated within your production org. So if you were doing something like creating an HTML page that does the sending of the email, or perhaps you are you're forwarding emails from an Exchange server or something like that, you'd need to go out and reconfigure that server to send to the new target email address. All right, in order to define an email service, there's really kind of three key steps here. Testing, you always want to do testing. But to get this to work, what you'd need to do is to create the class which contains the method that implements the interface that handles the emails. Then you'd need to define the email service, and as a part of defining the email service, you would need to generate the email addresses that we would be sending the emails to. Okay. All right, so I'm going to, instead of doing the slides here, I'm just going to kind of skip through this, but later on I'll do a demo of showing you how to generate the email service and what these different settings mean. So there are different security settings. I'll talk about that. One of the things that we'll also take a look at is this, the inbound email handler interface. And what this is that any class that we create that is implementing our email service is going to need to implement this interface, and specifically there's a single method called handle inbound email that will be called upon receiving the email. Okay. If you remember back in Eclipse in the force.com IDE, anytime we created a new class, one of the options we've always been selecting the default template when creating the new class. Well, one of the options that we could have selected was an inbound email service. And if we would have selected that for our template, what we're seeing here would be auto-populated into the body of the class. And then obviously it would, whatever class name you selected, it would insert that as the name of the class. But it'll essentially, when you select that inbound email handler as the template type, it'll then auto-populate that for you. Okay. All right, like I said, I'll come back to talking about all these different what to do upon a failure, our different options that are available, and I'll walk you through generating the email service. All right, in the code that we're going to generate, one of the things that we're going to receive, we're actually going to receive two things as a part of the method that's going to be called. We're going to receive the inbound email, and then we're going to receive the inbound envelope. The inbound email is going to contain things like references to, you'll be able to call getter methods that will return, well, who sent this? What is the subject of the email? What is the body of the email? If there are any attachments associated with this email, you can access a list of those attachments, whether they be binary or text attachments. So we will be passed this inbound email object and that's the mechanism by which we programmatically access the email that was sent to us. There's also a result. It's the return type of the handle inbound email method that we're going to implement. This can be utilized to send back an error message if we detect some sort of exception. We could catch that exception and then create a custom message to send back to the person or the machine that sent us the email for the purpose of relaying that message back to them that it failed for some reason. So. Attachments, one of the things that you would want to utilize your email services for are attachments. And within the code, the way that we can do that is that associated with our inbound email, we can access a list of all of our binary and text attachments. This is simply a list of binary large object blocks. What we can do is, in our case, in this code that we're looking at, what it does is we're going to take the attachment, access the blob, which is the contents of the email, or I'm sorry, the contents of the attachment, and then we're going to create a new attachment S object. So within Salesforce, associated with our records are notes and attachments. So another type of S object is an attachment. We could create one of those, load in to the body field of the attachment, the body of the attachment that we received. We could, for instance, set the name field of the attachment S object equal to the file name that we got that was the attachment, and then ultimately insert this into the database. We could do here. It's I think it's a little bit flawed, because one of the things that they do here is they have a text attachment, and they're converting it into its text by default, and yet they have to convert it into a blob because that's what an attachment contains. I think if they redid this, they'd probably want to, instead of inserting an attachment, insert a note. That's the most sort of similar data structure, so you know, making the conversion here unnecessary. So in addition to attachment, there's also note, and that would probably be a better fit for inserting a text attachment. All right, this is, you know, once again, we're doing the error log, the custom error log, and so it's just a custom S object, and we're going to insert this into the database. But within our class, it says that there's no access to the system log. Well, there's you can do system.debugs, and you can write data to the debug logs. So that facility is available. Don't think that this negates the system.debug call. But here, what we're showing you is we are a couple of things. We have our custom error record. We're populating that. We're inserting into the database. And then notice that our result, which is what we'd return as a part of our the call to the handle inbound email. So here, the result, we can set success equal to false, and then the message equal to something, and then what that's going to do is respond back to whoever sent us the email, and then relay whatever the message is back to them. So just some error handling. Now, in addition, there's also another facility called the email logs. What the email logs are is upon receiving the emails, we archive those emails. If you wanted to, for the purposes of maybe backing up or archiving or some sort of compliance, you can access those archives. What you do is you go out to monitoring email log files, and you have to enter in a request. So one of the things that this does is this is an offline lookup. What it does is you enter in the criteria. You can specify when the email was received, so a set of timestamps. And then in addition, you can also filter on who sent it if you want to look for a specific sender. So that's another option. But what happens is that you make this request, and then eventually it will send a notification to you indicating that it's ready, and you can then download the file that contains all the emails for that period. There's also some default debugging that will appear in the debug logs, and here we're just taking a look at some of that. So. All right, so what I'd like to do is to switch over to a demo, and let me just show you how to create an email service, and then we'll jump into doing the lab exercise. Okay, let me show you how to define an email service and then generate the associated email address that we can then call. So to create an email service, you'd log in to salesforce.com, go to the setup menu, and then under develop, under email services, we can define a new email service. So to define one, we just click on the new email service button. We can then enter in a name. So let me do demo email service. Okay. You're going to specify the class that implements the interface. So in this case, here I already have one that's pre-baked, but it's my candidate email handler. There's a few options when you're creating the email service. Accept attachments. You can set this up so that you only accept binary attachments, you only accept text attachments, or you accept both, or you accept neither. Okay. There's advanced email security settings. What this checkbox does is there's essentially some protocols out there that we utilize called, let's see here, there's SPF domain, let me see if I can get this to launch here. SPF sender ID and domain keys. And what these are is, these are a mechanism by which we can check to see whether or not the sender of the email is truly who they say they are. In other words, if we get an email from Mark Benioff at salesforce.com, did it actually come from the salesforce.com domain, or was it simply being spoofed coming from another location? So what these do is, the way this works is that it requires at least one of these to pass in order to accept the email. But if one of them fails, that will invalidate the email and it will not be accepted. So in thinking about the way that this must work behind the scenes, there must be some sort of middle state, like an I don't know or non-determination type of state, because in order for that sort of logic to play out. But at the end of the day, you must have at least one validation or acceptance of it. And then if there is one of them that says it's not valid, then that'll negate all of the other ones. There's an accept email from. This is applied to all of the addresses that we would have associated with this email service. But what we can enter in here is either a specific full email address or a domain name from which we would like to receive emails. In other words, this is sort of our authorized senders, where we can say, here, only accept from this specific email, or accept from this particular domain. We can also enter in multiples in here, just do comma delimited. An email service can be set to be inactive, so go ahead and check that box. And then there's a number of failure response settings, and what this is referring to is the different situations and what we should do. Now, remember that we had our limit based on the 1,000 times the number of licenses per day. Well, if we exceeded that limit, here we can identify what we want to do. All of these have two options in common, which is bounce message or discard message. Bounce, respond back, say we did not accept it for whatever reason, and discard means do not respond back, but just simply discard it. Now, for the over email rate limit action, we also have another option, which is to re-queue the message. In other words, wait for the next day or 24-hour period, and then attempt to then reprocess it. So if you do exceed that, you do have the option of essentially re-queuing it and then processing it when another buffer of available processing is available. There's a deactivated email address. One of the things that we're going to do is we're going to create an email address to send to. We can also deactivate it, therefore what to do when that's deactivated. If the email service itself is deactivated, what do we want to do? If it's an unauthenticated sender, in other words, what do we want to do if it doesn't meet our advanced security settings? Or if it's an unauthorized sender, in other words, if they were not within this accept email from list, then what do we want to do? Okay. All right, so we could click on save in order to create that. And then the next step is to generate the new email address. So we have the service, but we don't have any target emails or email addresses that we can send emails to. So what we can do is here we can define the first part of the email address. In other words, the part of the email address that's to the left of the @ symbol. So in this case, we'll call this demo email target, something like that. We can deactivate this later on if we wanted to. There's also a context user. In other words, when I'm executing this code, if I were to, for instance, execute it with sharing, well, who do I want that sharing model, or which user would I like that applied to? Since this is sort of a, it's a non-user associated thing, we would need to identify, well, what user perms do we want to use? And then finally, the last thing is the accept email from. Like I said, you can enter in either a domain or a full email address. You have the option of doing this for the email service in general, or doing it on a per email address basis. So we could create, for instance, we might generate multiple email addresses, and for each unique partner that would be sending us information, only accept email from that specific partner for that specific email address. So I'm going to click on save here, and what happens is that we generate, like I said, we generate a unique email address. We controlled that left side of the @ sign, but what we do is we generate something around a 25-digit code, and then .in, and then in my case I'm doing this on a sandbox org, so it has sandbox in there, .salesforce.com. So that would be the email address that we would ultimately be sending emails to. Okay. All right. Okay. So let me talk about what we're going to be doing in the lab. We're going to be working on the code. What we're going to do is you're going to do a few things. You're going to create the email service. You're going to generate the email addresses. And then you're going to complete some code which is going to process the email. Then, in order to test this out, what we're going to have you do is, if you have an email account that's accessible from your laptop, so if you have one that's in which you have, for instance, Outlook installed, you can send it from Outlook, but you could also send the email from a Gmail account or Yahoo or what have you. But the idea is that we have a HTML, an HTML in which you can click on the link. It then launches the default email client. You would then take the body of the message, the subject, and then insert for the to whatever email address that you generated. The reason is that our code is going to process data in a certain format. We need to use the format that we give you in order for your code to successfully process it. One of the things that we do in the code is some string manipulation. So it comes in a delimited format, and we need to pull out the different pieces of the data and parse it. Okay. The logic behind this is that this is sort of a candidate referral type thing again. So this is simply going to insert a candidate if the candidate does not already exist. If the candidate does exist, we are simply going to take the attachment. The idea here is that the attachment would be something like a PDF resume or a Word doc resume. And so the candidate would have an associated attachment, which would be the file format of their resume. Okay. All right, so why don't I take this moment to open the floor up to any questions, and then afterwards we will work on the lab exercise. So yes.
So I have two questions. First one is, you said there was messaging called inbound.envelope. The object. What does that do? Like, what information would that have?
I think that that has, let's see, information about, a little bit is redundant information like who the sender is. It represents the email envelope as opposed to the contents of the email. So I think it has information about the kind of stuff you'd see in an email header, like routing information and where it came from and stuff like that, is what you'd see within that envelope.
My next question is, while you were creating the email service, you could put authorized email addresses or domains in there with comma. If you don't put anything in there, what happens?
Then the email service can be, it will receive email from anywhere. So the default is that you don't have any authorized, or I should say, if there's nothing in there, then everyone is authorized to send emails to here. So we will not perform the checking to verify that it's only from certain people or certain domains. So, okay. Any other questions? Yes.
If an incoming email is not from the list, does that count towards your 1,000, whatever the number is, your limit, your daily limit?
Boy, I don't know. Let me look that one up. I don't know. Yeah. So if it's an unauthorized sender, does it account toward your daily limit? Okay. Let me look that one up. Any other questions? All right. I'd like to continue our discussion about email in Apex by talking about the flip side of receiving email, which is to send email from Apex. So it's possible to send programmatically, send an email from your Apex code. There is a send email method. We'll take a look at that in a bit. So one of the things that we can do, we can send single emails, or we can send mass emails. This is associated with the definitions that we have within Salesforce, where we have single emails and mass emails that we can send. There's email templates that we can reference. So if you create an email template utilizing the merge fields, you can reuse that kind of functionality. Same thing goes, plain text, HTML, Visualforce, so all of that stuff. When you are executing a transaction within Apex, you can send up to 10 or call send email 10 times. Now that being said, you can have multiple email addresses within a single send email. Finally, the amount of emails that you can send, there is a limit associated with that. One of the things that can happen is the mass email limit exceeded. In fact, when you're sending emails programmatically via Apex, it's using the same restriction in terms of the mass or the daily mass email limit. So it's counting against the same counter, if you will. So what is that limit? Well, the total daily limit for sending outbound emails is 1,000. So this is not multiplied by the number of licenses that you have. Now, anytime you send an email to a Salesforce user, that does not count against the daily limit. So, you know, for the purposes of for the purposes of internal communication, basically these that daily limit does not apply, and so it doesn't. It's not something to worry about when you're communicating to your internal users. Now, the understanding that why is it so low? Why is it so why just 1,000 per day? So Salesforce in general is not trying to get into the business that companies like Vertical Response and Constant Contact in terms of providing that level of mass emailing functionality. So if you do have a situation where you want to send out something like 50,000 emails to some sort of marketing target, this is not the mechanism by which to do it. We have partners, they have AppExchange apps that integrate with Salesforce for doing that type of distribution. Now, for a single email that's sent, there are different limitations in terms of how many targets we can send that to for a single email. So in the case of professional, it's 250, enterprise 500, and with unlimited, we can send all 1,000 in a single email. When we're executing this code, the from address is automatically populated with the context user's email address. When we are populating, one of the things that we're going to create is we're going to create that single email message or the mass email message. Both of these are classes, which we would call the setters associated with those classes to populate the email that we ultimately send. Both of them have some things in common, like the subject. In addition, the single email also has, you can manually populate the body. The mass emails, you have a reference to the template that you would like to utilize when we send out the mass email. There's also target object ID. What's the difference between a target object ID and a what ID? The what ID is the reference to the template ID. The target object ID, in the case of a single email, it's there's just one of these versus the mass is multiple. But this is the recipients, who you're sending this to in terms of being contacts or leads, whatever object it is that we're referencing as the target for who we're sending this to. Yeah, I'm sorry, the template, and let me restate something actually. The template ID, I misstated what the what ID is. The what ID is the reference to an object that would be used as a part of the mail merge to populate the email with data contextual to one of your records. And I'm sorry, the template ID is what we're using to refer to, obviously, the template that we want to utilize. So let me give you an example here. If we wanted to place some sort of product, or maybe we have a custom object and we want to dynamically insert values from that record, the what ID would be equal to the record ID of that data record, and then our mail merge or our merge fields would then be populated during runtime to then populate that email with contextual information based on whatever that record is. Okay, let's keep going. All right. So there's a send email method associated with the messaging class. It returns a send email result. The isSuccess that's going to be returned is simply, did we successfully parse it and hand it off to the Salesforce email servers. It is not a receipt upon which to judge whether or not the end user or the target has actually received this email. So it's just saying that it went to the outside world. So what we're going to do is, within the code, we're going to declare an object of type, we could do single email message or mass email message. There are setters associated with both of these. Set the subject, set, in our case, we're doing a single email message, so we can manually create the body of the message. And here we're creating an HTML body. The email addresses is a list, and what we're going to do is we're going to use the array notation to set up a single, or at least here we're setting up a single target address. We then set the to by calling that setter method, and then ultimately we call the method that's going to the messaging.send email, which is ultimately going to send this message out to the outside world. Okay. All right, why don't we jump into our module review for email in Apex, and then what we'll do is we'll start talking about some advanced topics. All right, let's see. I think I left off on, or Sharon Deep, you did the last question, is that right? So Deepa, that means you're up first. So what are the basic steps for creating an email service? Create the the class that would implement the email handler. Very good. So that would be one of 3 steps. What else? Create the email service. After you've created the email service, then you would generate what? The email address. Very good. So create the class that implements the email handler interface, and then define the email service, and then generate the email addresses. All right, so how many inbound emails can all email services combined consume in a day? 1,000 multiplied, yeah. So 1,000 multiplied by the number of user licenses you have. David, can an inbound email service process binary attachments as well as plain text attachments? Yes, it can. That was quite an easy question. I should make you do another, but I won't. So, Todd, can we restrict the domains from which an email service can receive emails?
Yes.
Yes, it can. Another slam dunk. Can we send a mass email outbound via Apex that uses an existing email template to a group of contacts? And then there's a second part of that question, to a group of users.
Yes. Contacts. No to users.
Very good. So we can use templates for sending information to contacts, but we cannot use it for sending an email to internal users. Herman, do emails sent via Apex to internal Salesforce users count against our org email limits for the day?
No.
No, they do not. Very good. And then can we use a visual force page, like an email template, to provide the content body of our outbound emails?
Yes.
Yes, you can. So yeah, so there's, it's kind of poorly worded there. It's not like an email template. You can create an email template that there's 3 types, and one of the types is visual force. And we have a number of different visual force tags that work in conjunction with email templates. So,
for more information on Salesforce.com training and certification, please visit www.salesforce.com/training.